Welcome back everyone, it's FNews57 here. I am back on Neverwinter on the Xbox One, and today I will be doing another comparison video for you. So this time I will be comparing two armor enchantments, and we will be looking at the Negation Enchantment versus the BarkShield enchantment. Both enchantments I have at Transcendent or rank 12, which is the current maximum rank for the mod that Neverwinter is in. When these can be ranked up an additional level, that'll be in mod 12B, but really does not affect which one of these is going to be best. So I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about both enchantments from a general standpoint and also from a personal preference standpoint, then try and show you both enchantments in use. Now, the enchantment that you're probably mostly familiar with and have seen me run around with is going to be the Negation Enchantment. Both of these enchantments are very good, but it's going to be a very close call between which one is best. So the Negation Enchantment, I like it because when you receive damage, each hit stacks a 3% increase to your damage resistance and a 1% increase to your incoming healing bonus, plus a 1% increase to your recovery for 9 seconds, and the effect can stack a maximum of 10 times. So basically, as long as you're getting hit, every hit that you take makes the next hit less damaging, plus gives you a recovery bonus, which I really like the recovery bonus. The healing bonus, it's okay, but not really fantastic. The BarkShield, on the other hand, is every 6 seconds, your armor receives a charge of bolstered bark, up to a maximum of 4 charges. When you have 1 charge of bolstered bark, the armor absorbs 20,000 damage. When you have 2 charges, it's 40,000, 3, 60,000, 4 charges of bolstered bark, your armor absorbs 80,000 damage. When somebody attempts to deal damage to you, 1 charge of bolstered bark is consumed. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and the enchantment looks good, but also can be bad at the same time. So, the way that it works, and what it comes down to as far as enchantments go, is going to be how long you are in combat for. So, I'm going to do a quick quest here. I'm also going to queue up for a dungeon, and we'll see which one hops up or I can actually get done first. And I don't mean hops up, I mean pops up, sorry. Let me tell this guy I'm going to join. Alright, so depending on how long it takes to get a group, I may make a small edit until we're actually in the instance. But in the meantime, I'm going to do the Portal of Tauren quest. Now, it is a level 70 quest, and I am going to equip my Negation Enchantment, because this is the first enchantment that I listed, and I just kind of want to go ahead and show you. So I'm going to add the Negation Armor Enchantment, and you'll see the visual effect. This is probably what you're used to seeing me use, because like I said, I really do like that recovery bonus. Now, these enemies are not very difficult, but you can see that I get Negation Armor, Negation Armor, Negation Armor, and I just constantly have Negation Armor. Basically, the maximum stacks of Negation Armor. Now, I cannot show you that I have the maximum stacks because, unfortunately, on console, we can't see all of our buffs. With that being said, though, I also have that very nice recovery bonus. And that's one of the reasons why I prefer the Negation. But it's not best in all circumstances. Now, if I equip the BarkShield, you'll see that my armor gets bolstered, and basically I can avoid damage completely. That is the bonus to the BarkShield enchantment. So what it comes down to is the group and the content that you are running. If you are running with a speedrun group, or a melt group, then more than likely you will prefer the BarkShield enchantment, because you're going to be in combat for a shorter amount of time. However, if you're not running with a speedrun group or a melt group, you may not actually like the BarkShield enchantment, because once you take basically 4 hits, you have to wait another 6 seconds until you can actually take another hit, because that's how long it takes to get the bolstered bark. So if we look at the queue, pretty much Mollabogs, Kessels, Shores, Valindra, all the T1 dungeons, doesn't really matter too much which enchantment you use, it's mostly personal preference. Temple of the Spider, because of the constant dot damage from like spitting spiders and the assassins and everything, it is actually inefficient to use the BarkShield unless you're running with a melt group that's completing that dungeon in like 6 minutes. Cragmire Crypt, same thing, number of enemies. I wouldn't advise using BarkShield until the very end boss fight. Then it will help, but if you're standing in the fire, the dot damage will just strip the BarkShield. So where BarkShield really comes into play is in the higher level content, in like Grey Wolf Den, CN, FBI, less so in Spellplague Caverns outside of the actual boss fights. So you might actually wish, if you're at the point that you're farming these dungeons, you may wish to have both of these enchantments to cycle in between, depending on what piece of content you're actually running. So the way that it works, if I use this BarkShield enchantment, and I can go ahead and equip it, and I'll show you why I don't particularly like it as much. I do like the enchantment, but I don't love the enchantment, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and equip it, and I'm not going to take any damage. You'll see it does show up on the buff bar. It says bolstered bark, and eventually there'll be a little 2 by it, and now there's a little 3 by it, and basically it'll go all the way up to a 4. So I have 4 stacks of bolstered bark, meaning that I can basically negate several hits up to 80,000 damage. Now, where this is also a drawback with the BarkShield is if you happen to have Anointed Army from a cleric, or you are a cleric and you decide to use BarkShield, even if you have the maximum stacks of BarkShield, you will still lose Anointed Army even due to dot damage. So just keep that in mind, that BarkShield will not save Anointed Army. So they pretty much, they don't cancel each other out, but it's less effective if you have both of them on. Now I'm going to start off and run through this. Also, when you load into an instance, it refreshes the stacks of bark, which is kind of annoying, but I understand why. So I had 4 stacks before coming in here, but now I have 0 stacks because I just got hit by those 2 spiders. So it really is entirely personal preference. This group is pretty strong, so it should be a relatively fast melt, which is why I actually have this enchantment equipped. But you'll notice that I am taking constant damage. Since I am taking constant damage, the BarkShield enchantment is basically not helping me, which is why I would prefer using the Negation Enchantment in this particular type of content. Now, where the BarkShield can be incredibly helpful, because I know I've talked a bit about it being bad, and you're probably wondering, why in the world does he have this enchantment if it's not good? Well, the BarkShield can actually save you. For instance, in Castle Never, you can literally walk through the green death spheres if you have 4 stacks of bolstered bark. So it's one of those kind of niche enchantments, almost like the Soulforge enchantment, viable under certain circumstances in certain content. Now, I have both enchantments, and I do intend to keep both enchantments because I have multiple loadouts. So I have a farming loadout, and then I have a tryhard loadout, which is where I would switch the armor enchantment as well. Like against this boss, wouldn't be bad to have the BarkShield on, I could actually take a couple of hits from the boss by having the BarkShield enchantment equipped, and that's with having low defense equipped, or not using like the defense boon from the guild or anything of that nature. I'm actually using the HP boon from the guild. So it is entirely personal preference which one you pick up. But this way you can see, now I have done multiple runs of multiple different pieces of content with these enchantments equipped prior to recording this. I'm not showing you screenshots of every one because, well, I just don't have the software to add all of that in. And I'm hoping to basically show you a little bit of the general enchantments use in one run. If you do have any questions or theory crafting on certain instances where you might wish to use one enchantment over another enchantment or something like that, by all means, leave a comment, ask, and we'll discuss it. This is just my opinion based upon the characters that I've used it on. So far, I have tested these enchantments primarily for my control wizard, but I have also tested them on my pally and my great weapon fighter. Now, my great weapon fighter is not as strong. He's an alt, so he's only around the 8k item level, and I really didn't notice too much of a difference with the negation enchantment on him because the damage resistance was so low to begin with. Now, for the rest of this, as you've seen, I take a little bit of damage. Basically, I take a couple hits, and those hits are zeros. Once the stacks of bolstered bark run out, the hits actually start to be the regular damage number. So I'm going to go ahead and put the negation enchantment back on, and you can have a general idea by watching my health bar that I don't take as much damage in sustained combat. So it really depends on your playstyle, actually. I've seen a lot of pallies try the BarkShield and then switch off of it because of the fact that they're taking constant damage. So, like this phase spider. This phase spider can one-shot me if I'm not careful. With that being said, though, if I put on the BarkShield enchantment, the phase spider can no longer one-shot me. And that's due to the fact that I have the bolstered bark. So it is, well, like that. The phase spider just one-shotted me because I had the negation enchantment on. So that is where, if I had stacks of bolstered bark, the BarkShield enchantment could literally save your life. Entirely up to you and personal preference at the end of the day. Also, it does, of course, help to have your team together when going up against those enemies. But remember that it takes 6 seconds, and most enemies have a faster attack speed than 6 seconds. So, really, at the end of the day, it's a toss-up, and depends, I would say, mostly on your group. That is the key factor. Like, that assassin hit me for 27,000, and that was with negation armor procced. Not fully procced, but with it procced. Also, I have lost the stacks of bolstered bark due to taking gravity damage, like jumping off of a bridge or anything. I have lost a stack of bolstered bark due to that, and I have lost 2 stacks of bolstered bark when messing around in like the Sea of Moving Ice area, where every time you take damage, you also take Everfrost damage, not Everfrost resistance, unless you have your Everfrost resistance maxed out. Then, of course, you wouldn't take it, which this is getting really annoying because, honestly, the group's not bad, but just a little bit weak to handle all of these phase spiders at once. So, that's actually, with this group, where I would say a Soul Forge would come in handy. But no matter what you do, you're never going to have a super ideal dungeon run for showcasing enchantments. It's just, we do the best with what we have. But when a group's together and you're taking constant damage, especially in a dungeon like this, that is when I greatly prefer the negation enchantment. Yes, you lose quite a bit of your health bar if you're not careful. depending on whether you have a shield or not. That's one thing. Our Guardian fighter right now is not running Knight's Valor, so we basically don't have a damage reduction other than when like Anointed Army or Astral Shield is up. Now, neither one of these enchantments scales with power or scales with the group or anything like that, so you don't have to be worried about how much power you have. You mainly just have to be worried about how long you're actually in combat for. Which, we had a few deaths there. It's kind of to be expected when running with just a random setup. In short, at the end, I would like to know your opinions, whether you prefer the BarkShield or you prefer the Negation. I would say that by the time you get to around the item level that I'm at, around the 16k mark, you're probably going to have a fair deal of melt runs. And if you have a fair deal of melt runs, then you'll want the BarkShield enchantment. But if you're mostly running pug groups, like I do a lot, then it would be a good idea to have the Negation enchantment. Except when I run FBI, I normally put the BarkShield on. Basically, everything in FBI is a individual hit, and it hits really hard. So, due to that, I prefer the BarkShield. Now, I'm probably not doing my best damage in this instance, because I'm mainly focused on swapping around my armor enchantments, just to showcase them. But that's not what we're here for. We're not here for the damage. We are here to discuss the armor enchantments. And she's dying pretty quick, so like I said at the beginning of the video, it's a pretty good group. They're more towards the melt side than a pug group normally is. But with that being said, though, it's just one of those situations that it depends on the group, and it might change. Mainly the fact that we don't have any kind of damage reduction is one of the drawbacks to the current run, and why BarkShield sometimes will come in handy. But in that fight, yeah, I prefer the Negation. I would say the way that it works for most of the content that I run is my farming enchantment generally is the Negation enchantment. Then my tryhard enchantment is usually the BarkShield enchantment. And the reason why I swap between them is just solely due to what group I'm running with, what piece of content I'm running at that time. It's entirely up to you. I have tried the BarkShield at lower ranks, and I really didn't feel the BarkShield became viable for any sort of use until around rank 10. Now that's just my personal opinion, but that's what I found when testing out the enchantment and when building it. The Negation enchantment, you're still stacking a damage resistance buff, but if you can only get a lesser of the two enchantments, I would say slight edge Negation, but at that point your character may actually be weak enough that the Soul Forge would be more viable than the BarkShield or the Negation enchantment at lesser. I know I didn't say I was going to include the Soul Forge in the comparison, but it's the other enchantment that people like, so I figured why not mention it, due to the fact that, well, people like it. And that is probably the best enchantment at lesser for the armor enchantments, because it basically does the same thing. So, entirely up to you what you prefer to run, what groups you prefer to run with. It's 100% personal preference. Basically, to sum it up as short as possible, it all comes down to how long you are going to be in combat and how much of a damage reduction you already have. The longer a fight lasts, the better the Negation enchantment. the faster the fight goes by with the less dot damage that you take, the better the BarkShield enchantment is. At the end of the day, personal preference though. So if you have any questions or anything, by all means, leave a comment. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, smash that like button, and of course, share the video with your friends or guildmates. That greatly helps out with the searchability of videos here on YouTube. If you do have a request for a certain video for me to work on, also let me know. But until then, my brothers and sisters, stay frosty.